Hello and welcome to episode 0 of what will be my next playthrough. We'll be using Archipelago, and this video will serve as an overview of what Archipelago is, how it works, and how to duplicate the setup I'll be using. First things first, what is Archipelago? We will read verbatim from their homepage, which is found here. Archipelago is a cross-game modification system which randomizes different games, then uses the results to build a single unified multiplayer game. Items from one game may be present in another, and you will need your fellow players to find you items in their games to help you complete your own. So basically it's a multi-game, multi-world, multiplayer randomizer system. You can have effectively two people playing their own versions of Link to the Past who can find loot between them that is required for each other's game, but also for a third player or fourth player playing Minecraft or Dark Souls. This is the kind of thing or the nonsense you can get up to here. I'm going to be playing this solo, which you do by basically configuring 3 separate players and then simply just taking the role of each of the players, and we'll go through how all of that is done. So, as I would normally do, I strongly encourage you to read the information on the website. Don't just rely on stuff you find in videos or this one. This is just going to be a fairly broad overview. I'm going to brush over a bunch of things like how to set up a ROM for older games. They have a Discord. If you get stuck and need help, then that would be the place to go. So we have 2 important links here. We have a list of supporting games and a list or the list of setup guides. Supporting games is a kind of important page. It doesn't just link every game that is currently or will currently work in Archipelago. It also gives a page listing the information of the game, the setup guide for that game. There is different methods required for different games, and a settings page. This is where you configure your randomizer settings. The support guides are what they sound like. You have the main one here. This will teach you how to set up Archipelago in general, but there will also be ones for each individual game in here, and the links on this page will point to the same ones on these ones here. In fact, I think this page just links to the relevant game in here. So, depending on what game you want to play will depend upon how many hoops you will need to jump through. Some games won't even need the Archipelago software itself. All of the older games will require a legally acquired ROM file for that game that the Archipelago software will mod to run with its systems. And the newer games will, generally speaking, just require a mod to be installed. But games like Factorio and Minecraft will need a modded dedicated server running in order for you to be able to connect to it. So, our setup is going to be a randomizer between Factorio, Hollow Knight, and Subnautica. The first thing we're going to need to do is actually download the Archipelago software. So if we come through to this link here, which is this page here, we can find this on the GitHub release page. So you can scroll down to the bottom of all of this and you will find the installers down here. Generally speaking, you probably only need the setup Archipelago exe, so that's the one you'll need to grab and run. When you run it, let me just pull it up so that we can get this to appear. So, this will generally speaking be preset to full installation. Unless you actually have all of these ROMs, you will not want to have them enabled. So you probably just want to disable all of these, disable the SNI client, and then you only want to keep the other things that you're going to be using. So I've installed Minecraft even though we're not using, but otherwise the Factorio is the main thing that we need out of this. Once you've configured all of that, you can then tell it to install and it will go through the motions and create you a nice folder with everything in it. Looks a bit like this. We'll get to that later. Anyway, now that you have the software installed, we need to prep our 3 games. So if we come over to the setup guide for Factorio, it tells us that we are going to need a copy of the Factorio game. The YAML file is the configuration file. We'll get to that later. One thing it mentions in here that it doesn't tell you where it comes from is this bit. Acquire the Archipelago mod for this seed. That is generated when you generate the game. So you will need that after you have done a later step in order to finish setting up the game. But because we need to run the game as a dedicated server, we actually are going to need to download the standalone version. Now, if you have bought it on Steam, you can just go to the Factorio website. If you create an account or log in and then link your Steam account, it will basically give you access to download the just the base version here. So once you have done that, you can come to the downloads page and grab the zip file. Factorio is going to need to be installed for the server within the Archipelago directory, create a folder for it, and then extract the contents of the Factorio installation or zip file into here. Once you've done that, you will need to run Factorio once, log into the account you created on their website so that it can authenticate, and then you can close out. You may want to, it's not required, you can just connect via the Steam client, create a separate folder, or copy the contents of this folder and create a separate folder called client, because this one here will be used by Archipelago to run the server, whereas we will actually want to be running a client rather than the server. So I have a separate folder for this. Okay, that largely means that we have done with everything we can set up for Factorio. We're still going to need to add the mod to it, but in order to do that, we will have to have our settings sorted first. So we'll prep the other games. Hollow Knight being the next one, the only thing we really need to grab is the Scarab mod launcher, or mod install, I forget which way they call it. So again, there's a nice little GitHub page for this. It's just a zip file, so extract it to wherever you want to use it. Let me fire that up so that you can see it. Scarab mod manager, run Scarab. It will give you a window that looks a bit like this. The only thing you need to tell it to do is install, which is this button here, Archipelago, and it will install all of the prerequisites. If you want to add additional mods, you can do, but the Archipelago one is the only one that you need. And that pretty much covers the setup for Hollow Knight. Nice and simple, just download and install the game and then enable the mods. Lastly, we have Subnautica. Similar kind of thing. You need to own Subnautica, it doesn't matter whether it's on Steam or Epic, and then you want to go over to the GitHub page for this. This is the Archipelago randomizer for it. Again, it's just a zip file. This file wants to be extracted straight over the top of the install directory. So it just says drop it all in so that that is a valid path. Okay, that's all games prepped up to the point that we can do now. Next, we are finally ready to get our settings. Now the settings are going to be basically the randomization settings for each individual game. Again, if we go back to the supported games page, there is a settings page on every single game. We already have them all open, and these should be the settings that I've configured it to do. Yep, they are. So, one thing you will need to do, you will need to put in a player name here. This will need to be unique between every game that you're playing. If you have a multiplayer game, then it's just whatever their player name is. It doesn't really matter. This is just the name that they will use to basically associate themselves with whatever given world they're creating. So I'm just using SkidFa for Factorio, HK for Hollow Knight, and SU for Subnautica. In terms of settings-wise, this is mostly the default settings. The things that I have changed, by default, it will use a single tech tree layout, basically meaning that you can research anything on the tech tree at any point. I'm using a large diamond, which means there's going to be a total of 16 nodes in each diamond, and in order to research any given tech in it, I'm going to have the prerequisites done. Free samples is by default set to stack. This basically means that when you unlock a technology or a technology is given to you from another game, it will give you a free stack of that item. I've told it that I only wanted to give me a single craft. Anything else? Yes, by default, the technology tree information usually is set to full, which basically just tells you what every single item in the technology tree is. We've changed it to set it to advancement, so it will simply tell us which are the important ones, rather than which ones are actually required. Aside from that, everything else on here should be more or less default. The game will be considered complete when we launch a rocket, at which point we can actually send any remaining items still in our game over to everyone, or over to all of the other games that we'll be playing. Now, the next thing we need to do is export the settings. This will create a YAML file and allow you to download it. You're going to need to have these if you're running a multiplayer game or a game that has multiple worlds. If you only want to run a game that has a single world, you can actually click generate game down here, but we'll get to that later. Next, Hollow Knight. Our settings for Hollow Knight are most definitely non-standard. For starters, we have allowed the entirety of white palettes to be included as part of the randomizer set. We have also randomized focus, so we'll start without focus. We'll start without swim. Mass shards, vessel fragments are randomized. Charm notches are randomized, they're not normally. Geo chests have been randomized. The junk pit chests have been randomized. Rancid eggs are now randomized. Can't remember whether relics are randomized by default, but we have them on. The only thing we don't have randomized is geo rocks, because there's a lot of geo rocks, and this is already going to make a lot of randomized items within the game. And the last thing we've randomized, because apparently we're a glutton for punishment, is the nail. We will not start with left, right, or up attacks on a nail. We will only be able to pogo. We will have to unlock those later. And we've also randomized soul totems. I was on the fence about this one just because of how many extra randomized items it's going to add. My concern with this particular setup, so we may end up voiding some of this, or voiding the game after I started playing it, and reset the soul totems to turn them off. But the reason I wanted to turn them on is just so that there was a chance that something important is in the Path of Pain. Otherwise, I've not turned on any skips, even though I'm capable of a decent number of them, predominantly because I don't know all the locations in which they can be used. I only know the locations that they are used for any percent, no major glitches. But we have turned on proficient combat, which may require us to do a difficult boss with very little gear. Other than that, I think there's one other thing. We have randomized charm notches, so that the cost is technically one less than vanilla. Vanilla, the sum total of all notch costs is 90. So that will either give us a really good, it depends on how our rolls are, it'll either give us a really good selection of notches, or it's going to make us not be able to use good ones when we get them. But otherwise, yep, everything is the same, but we have split Crystal Half, Mothwing Cloak, and Mantis Claw into left and right variants. Again, once you've all set this up, export this to get your configuration file, and then we'll move on to Subnautica. So Subnautica doesn't really have many options here. It's fairly simple. The goal of this game is going to be the launch. Oh, that is one thing. Hollow Knight, by default, the setting for goal is usually any, so any of the 3 endings. I've changed it to be Radiant. We have to kill Radiant to beat Hollow Knight. Okay. So the only thing in here that we've changed, I believe... Yep, there's 2 things. We've changed swim rules. This determines how far the game is expecting you to go from the maximum vehicle depth in order to be able to find an item. Having it on normal can expect me to do death runs to a location, but given the fact that there is also items as part of this, so item normal, item versions basically expect you, or add to the depths that you can get to, and expect you to have particular items to increase your speed or the amount of distance you can go. Given the fact that the way that I've played Subnautica, I've played it once. Last time is that I kept a spare oxygen tank on me. I think having it on normal should be relatively safe, but still require me to go down a bit. We've also included, as part of the randomization, all of the creature scans, all 50 of them, which basically means that there could be an item locked behind scanning a Leviathan. We shall have to see. Okay, so that is the settings for all three games. Now that we have our settings files, which we have here, these are the output files. Oh, there is one other change I made that I should mention. It's not on the settings page, but Factorio has a setting that gives you a set of items at the start of the game. It gives you, actually, by default, if you don't change it, I think it's 20 burner drills and 20 furnaces. I've told it to give me nothing. So I've changed that so that it's not going to start me with any items other than the gun and the ammunition you get from disassembling your ship. So yeah, now that we have our three files, they are each labelled with their individual name for what we set up in here. Let me just check. Yep, we're now ready to generate the rando. We can do this one of two ways. We can zip up all three player files and pass that file to the generator on the website. You will find that under Getting Started, Generate Game. It'll display a page like this. Just upload the zip file to here and it will generate the game for you. You will still need to run the Factorio server anyway, so we are going to do this by way of the local software. So, let me pull the folders over. So the first thing we're going to need to do is copy over these three files, which is what we got from the website, over into the players directory. I have already done this. While we're here, I'll just quickly mention the templates folder here. This basically contains a list of every single game and a configuration file for them. These configuration files hold every single setting that is available for that game, including some that may not appear on the website. So you can always manually create a settings file using one of these if you want to. Okay, now that we have the files copied over into here, we can run the generator. We can do that one of two ways. We can run the executable, the ArchipelagoGenerator.exe, or we can run the launcher and then run the generator from here. This is going to pop up a bat window, which if I grab quickly, is going to calculate all the settings files, work out how many items there are, balance everything, and then generate the files we need for the playthrough, and then auto close. So that will generate in the outputs folder, which is the most recent one because I had problems. I realized a configuration I changed on the Factorio side I hadn't updated. Specifically the one that starts you with 20 burners and 20 furnaces. I wanted to disable that, so it's starting me, in theory, if I got it right and it works, with a single piece of wood. Anyway, so yeah, it will generate this zip file here. We're going to extract this zip file directly into here because we want some files from it. The two important files are this one here, the .archipelago file, and this one here. This one here is the mod that we will need for Factorio. So we will do that now. We will finalize our settings for Factorio. So this mod needs to be put into the mods folder for both the server and the client. Since we have them both here, we can drop that into there, and we come on back over here to the client side and drop that into there. And that is Factorio finally set up. Okay, now it's time to start the server. Again, there are two ways that we can do this. This file here, you can actually pass it, if we come back to the website, to the host game page. If you pass it into here, it will actually create a game running on the website itself. So you'll end up with one of these. Now, you can use this if you want. There's nothing that'll stop you, but you will still need to run the the Factorio server locally in order for that game to work, because it's a piece of link software. Basically, we need to have this running which will also launch the server itself in order to connect Factorio. Because the way it works is this connects to the Archipelago server, and then we connect to the Factorio dedicated server. For all the other games, when you start them up, you will see this when we start the playthrough next week. You just need to give them the address of the server, which in our case is going to be localhost or 127.0.0.1. And then the username you're using for, or the player name you're using for that game. And then if a password's been set up, you'll need the password as well. Anything else? I think that pretty much covers it. Again, this is kind of just an overview, so don't worry too much about it. If you want to host things locally, you want to run the host command here. That will open things up. It will ask you to select the Archipelago file. So again, that's just this one here. I'm not going to drag this window on because I believe it will spit out my IP address. Yep. So that will say load an embedded data package for all the games. It will detect there's no saved states, it will create a new game, and then it will host the game on your IP address. If your router isn't set up to port forward, then it's not going to matter anyway. But then it will also start listening on, or listening for connections to connect in. Once you have that running, if you're going to play Factorio, you need to make sure the Factorio client is running first. So this one here, or this one here. If you're not playing Factorio at that time, and you're playing one of the other games, then you don't need to. So again, if you launch this, this will open a nice little window. I'm going to have to check all of that in post to make sure it doesn't spit out my IP address anywhere. But once this is all loaded up and is ready, then you need to tell the server itself to connect to Archipelago. And if you do that, you will also see in Archipelago that the user for, or the player name for the Factorio game has joined. And that's how you get Factorio to work. And then when you're done, you can just tell it to exit, which will disconnect it, and then you can close this down. And similarly, if you're running the server locally, you'll want to do a /save followed by a /exit to close the server down. And that's it. So yeah, we'll be playing, or this will be our playthrough for the next while. It's probably going to take a while. Factorio is not a short game. You can speedrun it, I never have. I've beaten it a few times, but I've not played it recently. Probably the game, though, that worries me most is Subnautica, because my playthrough with that was 50 hours long, and I've only played it once, and that was years ago at this point. Hollow Knight is my best game, so I'm hoping that Hollow Knight will have enough items in it to allow me to force progression in the other games to speed them up. But the way we're going to work it is on Monday we'll stream Factorio, on Tuesday we'll stream Hollow Knight, and on Wednesday we'll stream Hollow Knight stream. There'll be a Hollow Knight upload. On Friday there will be a Subnautica upload, and we will keep that schedule up until the point that we reach a point that we can't progress in one of the games, in which case we'll then start doubling up games each week. But that's the plan, that's Archipelago, that's how to set things up. So, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed the show, and hopefully we will see you next time. Cheerio.